Good morning, and welcome to Animal Magic with Jay Snodgrass. Today's episode is called Leviathan. Someone came up to me as I was preparing to speak, and she said, I had this dream that I was in your house, and it was a mess because you're always talking about the chaos you live in. And I thought, Elizabeth is going to kill me if she thinks I'm telling people our home is a shambles. She's a full-time physician, and I'm the housekeeper, by the way, so it's my fault, not hers, when things get messy. Also, someone dreamed about being in my house. In my defense, she didn't specify whether I was at home or not, so I think I'm in the clear on that. I don't mean to say we live in a mess, but it's a constant effort to keep things clean, with 4 kids, 2 of them now teenagers, so extra messy, and a hyper-energetic dog. It's a blurry swirl of mass and motion. So when I say chaos, I mean it in the sense of the primordial sea, the rising tide, the undertow, waves roll in and out, someone's left mitten has disappeared, but look, the sandal we searched for all summer is suddenly in the middle of the floor. No one knows how. William's backpack is gone. We're all digging. Oh, I found it. Wait, no, that's Jackson's backpack from 5th grade, the one that disappeared. And look, it still has his homework. Anything you set down can sink and later resurface anywhere. But I have this little island, my own private island, on top of the bathroom medicine cabinet, so I'm the only one who can reach it. So that's where I keep my comb, so I can find my way through this enchanted bramble, my toothbrush, so I don't breathe dragon fire at night, little scissor, my eyebrows get kind of wizardy about once a week, and a razor and shaving cream, since my cheeks get a little bit wolfy about once every full moon. So all my protective talismans and charms live on this enchanted island where the elves and dwarves and hobbits and little goblins can't get to them. It's best for all of us that way, or else things could go full-on Lord of the Rings in my house. Well, we got the house professionally cleaned. They did a great job, but they wiped out my little island. My things disappeared into the widening gyre. I suspect my little scissor got swallowed by a sea monster. In the biblical book of Job, God is hanging out with one of his angels, one of whom has the job of being disagreeable. Since ancient Near Eastern kings were always surrounded by cronies and yes-men and spin doctors, they had to have one advisor in the cabinet whose job it was to take the other side of the debate. And this advisory position was called Hasatan. It's from this we get the word Satan, but this was centuries before the church invented the devil to make itself look good by comparison. Anyway, God was chatting with his buddy, the angel Satan, and said, look at this guy Job, who loves me no matter what, or whatnot. And the angel said, maybe he only loves you because you're always giving him stuff, but I'll bet if it was all stripped away, he would curse you. So God says, go for it, and Job loses everything, lock, stock, and barrel. Fire from the sky burns his flocks, a house collapses on his children, and his body breaks out in a rash. The poor guy was left with nothing but a piece of broken pottery to scratch his itches with. Then his 3 best friends and wife show up and attempt to talk him to death. And when he's withstood all this without renouncing his faith, God shows up and gives a long speech to let this guy know how small he is. And the whole thing ramps up to a big fish story, like big fish of biblical proportions, about how God once caught this gigantic unholy mackerel. It goes on and on. I've edited this down by half, but it's still going to seem a bit lengthy. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook or press down its tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it make supplications to you? Will it speak soft words to you? Will you play with it like with a bird, or will you put it on a leash for your little girls? Any hope of capturing it will be disappointed. Were not even the gods overwhelmed by the sight of it? Its sneezes flash forth light. Out of its nostrils comes smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. Its breath kindles coals, and a flame comes out of its mouth. When it raises itself up, the gods are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. It makes the deep boil like a pot. It makes the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a shining wake behind it. On earth it has no equal, a creature without fear. Now, in the story, a great sea beast is not Job's problem. It's not the Leviathan that killed his children and flocks and afflicted his skin with boils and whatnot. It's Satan. Or really, since God empowered Satan to torment this innocent man, Job's problem is God. More specifically, God's pride. There was no reason for an enlightened deity to take such offense and accept this bet. God actually wins the bet. But nonetheless, he shows up, and we really have to hand it to Job because he's been totally ruined, and now he's got to sit through this story about how God once caught a fish this big, and when God says this big, he can reach really, really far. All right, well, that's not an exact quote from the Bible. But what's up with this? Battling a sea monster was like a rite of passage, like a graduation valedictory initiation ritual for young storm gods. Baal, the indigenous Canaanite lightning god, had to battle Yam, the sea. Or, in one version, his sister had to do it for him, but he generally gets all the credit. Ra, the Egyptian god, had to battle Apep, the chaos serpent who tried to swallow the sun each day. Marduk, the Babylonian thunderlord, had to battle the saltwater goddess Tiamat, his own grandmother, who had taken the form of a giant crustacean. And he split her to pieces like a clamshell. Half became the platter-shaped world, and the other half became the dome of the sky. This, I think, is the clearest of the stories because in the Babylonian story, Mumu Tiamat, Mother Ocean, was the primordial sea, the original great power of creation. Marduk's battle with the primal goddess is clearly a sign of a male mutiny, after which the defeated fertility goddess became a symbol of destructive chaos, while the warrior god became the symbol of destructive order, like the Hydra or any number of Greek mythical monsters. We may think of monsters as male, but the Leviathan could represent some prehistoric sea goddess. Still, for those of us who remember the old claymation Clash of the Titans and smirked every time we heard the line, "Release the Kraken," it can be hard to take the Leviathan story very seriously. Leviathan. Even the name sounds large, like the world's biggest size of Levi's jeans, Leviathan. But still, compared to God, wouldn't this thing be pretty small? Like, if God's got the whole world in his hands, then a great blue whale would be like the size of a tadpole. But the size of God's hands in relation to creation and vice versa. All right, this is going to be hard to explain. Imagine a chalkboard, and no, a chalkboard would be hard to explain too. So let's try this. We'll start with the present and work our way back to the past. The idea of God as the calculating master craftsman of the clockwork universe is just a couple centuries old. Before that, God had been more like a potter who took the primeval muck and shaped a large clay platter, the flat earth, which for a long time had been just the Middle East. And before that, God had been the local thunder boss of Israel, a nation the size of New Jersey. And it was kind of a dump like New Jersey, but at least it wasn't a total mess. God kept the chaos of the sea at bay by battling this monster. Before the God of Israel achieved epic Springsteen proportions, becoming a global franchise, back when he was local, this Leviathan fight was the claim to fame at the top of God's resume. But as the Bible developed and the conception of God grew more powerful, it became undignified to imagine him mud-wrestling this monster with all of creation at stake. The temple priesthood didn't want King Kong versus Godzilla or King God versus Kongzilla or whatever. They were chanting priests, not screaming wrestling fans. So they downplayed this Clash of the Titans until it faded into the background. And finally, they drafted their masterpiece, the 7-day creation story, where the master landscaper dictated the development from chaos to kingdom in a calm, orderly manner. God doesn't even have to get his hands dirty. He doesn't even need hands at all. He just gives instructions, then inspects it, and says that it's good. If we read closely in the first chapter of Genesis, sea monsters are actually there on the checklist, but it's all part of the plan. They pass inspection with never a mention of hazard or friction. And the priesthood, who wrote this new and improved creation story, got final editorial control over the Torah, so they put their story first. And then the whole finalized Torah got retrojected back to the dawn of time, every jot and tittle inevitably predestined, so that these stories in this sequence became older than the earth itself. Some of us believe this and some of us don't, but we still have a hard time imagining that the Israelite concept of creation was fluid. It evolved through fads and phases for hundreds of years before getting set in stone as timeless scripture. So the present sequence of the Bible creates this odd situation because when we encounter the Leviathan legend in the books of Job, Psalms, and Isaiah, we say, wait, didn't God make the sea monsters and say they were good? So why all this gladiatorial thrashing and slashing and bashing? In some scriptural texts, we hear that it's been killed and dismembered, its carcass left out for the scavengers. And then in other texts, it's still at large. Some rabbinic commentators have sought to smooth this inconsistency by saying that there were two Leviathans, and God killed the female and castrated the male, which actually sounds doubly cruel. Or some say it was a catch and release, and that God kept this beast as a pet that he plays with for a couple hours a day, fattening it up for a big fish fry to feed the righteous in the world to come. But whatever the story meant, we've got to remember that this was before the invention of the devil, before the great beast of Babylon, long before the introduction of religion's all-time greatest nemesis, the snooze button, the Leviathan fight. This was the big battle royale of the ages. Religion's battle against the primeval sea monster can sound like some phase from the mythical past, but it continues into the present. These days, the battle is waged in courtrooms and classrooms, religion versus evolution, the theory that all life began in the primal ocean. That's the shapeless sea monster Christianity is fighting today. And it's a good fight, a worthy cause, because if we were to accept that all organisms are descended from the same original single-celled creature, the primates and pine trees, portobellos and pond scum, the pufferfish and pests would be our distant cousins. Really? I have a hard enough time believing we're related to Pennsylvanians. But if we acknowledge that kinship, that interconnection, even interdependence, we would have to seriously reconsider the way the human race goes stomping around in the community of life. And that's a pretty daunting prospect. It's much easier to keep fighting a mythical sea monster, a formless darkness on the face of the deep. The Inuit, indigenous peoples of Alaska and parts of Siberia, believe that the icy depths of the ocean are ruled by the sea mother, Sedna. Various tribes have varying stories about her origin, and most agree that she was a giantess, either disobedient or dangerous to her father, so he cut off her fingers and she sank into the dark waters. Her fingers became the deep-sea creatures, such as seals and whales, whom she still commands, and if the humans disrespect her, she will withdraw them all so far under the ice that hunters will come home empty-handed. They say this ocean goddess looks like a merwhale, and that once a year the tribal shaman must enter a trance and send his spirit deep into the ice-watery underworld to comb her hair. Well, that's a nice story. Instead of fighting the chaos, getting into some big mythical Bigfoot versus Loch Ness monster mash, instead of battling the chaos, you learn to balance with it. In humanity's long campaign to tame nature, it becomes clear that it's not the great white whales that pose the greatest danger to us. It's the mad Captain Ahabs of industry and politics recklessly steering the ship of state. Mother Nature doesn't need to be bludgeoned to death. Maybe she's waiting for us to lay down our swords and plowshares and gently brush her hair. If only I could find the comb that got swept away from my little island. Thank you for listening. This is Animal Magic with Jay Snodgrass. If you like what's here, there's more of it. I don't know. There's things you can find at j-snodgrass.com. Thanks.